Hi, I'm Brad. There are a lot of ways that I see my videos differently, probably, than a lot of other YouTubers see their videos. Every video I make, I hope that will become one little small piece to a giant archive of VR history. Whether I review software or hardware, it's all very interesting for me to imagine in like 10 years, people will be looking back at this video and others I make and think, wow, this is kind of crazy that people did it this way back then. Back in 2016, I had an HTC Vive Pre, which was like a pre-consumer version of the HTC Vive before it came out. And before the actual device came out, Steam VR was almost unusable. It was incredibly buggy, it crashed constantly, and it just was it was awful. It was terrible. But literally like a week or two before the actual Vive came out for consumers, Valve pretty much fixed everything. And yeah, it's crazy when I think about it still. And my biggest regret thinking back to that time is, God, I really wish I actually recorded some of the problems and just craziness that the Steam VR back then had. So I missed that opportunity. I missed that opportunity to record VR history. Steam VR is undoubtedly the most used PC VR platform for running VR and software and hardware and all that good stuff. Well, now, 5 years later, I feel like I have a chance to kind of maybe not go back to the past and fix my mistake, but have a chance to look at, well, the state of Steam VR now. While today's current iteration of Steam VR is nowhere near as bad as what I was explaining back then, it's still incredibly buggy and is honestly an absolute mess right now. So today, I just want to take a look at the most used PCVR platform that really just kind of sucks and is outdated. I'm going to talk about the biggest bugs that a lot of people seem to have and a lot of things that people hate about it. And a lot of these problems I'm about to go into are not even problems that I'm just having. I bet you there's some people in the audience that are going to notice some problems I didn't bring up that happens to them all the time, and they're going to hopefully write those in the comments section. Because again, SteamVR's current iteration is honestly a mess, and I think it's important to kind of archive it and point out some of the worst parts about it. So that's what this video is. So sit back, relax, and let's crush SteamVR together. So first I want to talk about the fact that VR is in a weird place right now, but it's actually not as weird as you think. A lot of people in the PCVR community are for some reason very concerned about something like standalone headsets taking over. I see it very similar to how there is the console mainstream and then there's the people who end up playing just normal PC gaming. In fact, a lot of that is very transferable to how VR is working right now. A lot of people pick up console gaming because it's very simple, it's very attainable, and everything just works well. But there's a lot of people who start out in console gaming and eventually work their way up to PC gaming. And they realize they have a lot more opportunities to see bigger graphics or more interesting experimental games that you won't see on a console, many other reasons why. And it's no doubt that even people who are switching to PC gaming, they get very used to doing very basic troubleshooting for their games. Again, that's one of the main reasons people really gravitate to console gaming is because, again, they buy a console, they buy a game, they buy a subscription service, and it just works. Similar to how Quest works, right? It's a standalone headset, it just works. Everything works pretty well. PCVR is like PC gaming. You gotta troubleshoot a lot. That being said, I feel like the troubleshooting involved with PC VR right now is actually more insane than it really needs to be. Again, PC gamers are very used to doing basic troubleshooting to make sure their games are working at their best. But when your biggest problem is basically Steam VR itself running terribly and just bugging out and crashing, then yeah, there's a huge problem. Now, I want to bring up some silver lining that a lot of the things that I'm going to be mentioning, I really do believe are going to be fixed pretty soon. Valve has been hinting on working on something called SteamVR 2.0. At the time of this video, we're still on SteamVR 1.17, and SteamVR 1.17 is still part of SteamVR 1.0. And Valve basically said that this SteamVR 2.0, once it hits, it'll basically be an entirely new user experience. So again, this video will be outdated probably when that comes out. At least a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in this video. But I still think it's very interesting to talk about all the things that are just people right now are dealing with in PCVR in general. I'm going to actually start with one of the smallest issues, in my opinion. So while Steam VR actually supports almost every VR headset out there in a pretty robust way, I mean, Valve over time add supports to even Oculus Quest headsets if they want to use it on Steam VR, which is really cool. It's undoubtedly that Steam VR was mainly built around the idea of their own headsets and their lighthouse system. Despite that, we see a lot of weird kind of old bugs, such as, well, if you have lighthouse space stations, there's a lot of bugs that people have where when you turn off VR, the Bluetooth inside your computer or your headset is actually supposed to communicate to your base stations to automatically turn off. And for a lot of people, that doesn't actually work. And I'm actually one of those people. It's very unreliable, and I ended up getting so tired of the instability of that not working that I keep my lighthouses on all the time. Whether or not that's a good idea, I don't freaking care. I'm tired of things not working. And more things that are not working. Connecting normal devices. What does that mean? Well, okay. Again, this is not in every user situation, but a lot of people have a lot of controllers that they use. Maybe they have a lot of trackers or a lot of just things for full body and stuff. Sometimes Steam VR is a complete mess when it comes to repairing other controllers. Let's say you have enough Steam VR dongles that you can connect 5 devices. So 2 of them are the controllers, left and right hand, but 3 of them are the full body tracking. Well, there's actually a weird bug thing or discretion thing, I don't even know what to call it, that Valve recommends that if you have a Valve Index, for example, to make sure your Valve Index controllers are connected to the 2 radios that are built into your headset. If any of your Valve Index controllers are connecting to your Vive dongles, apparently that will cause a lot of problems for some reason. And the biggest problem with it, not only is just like weird tracking and drifting and stuff, a big problem is actually not being able to pair the devices to begin with. You will be able to set all these controllers into pair mode and have one more slot left, but SteamVR will just literally not detect your controller or your tracker. That's freaking obscenely annoying. I can't. There's a reason I started with this one. And another annoying thing about this one bug is what's really weird about with your index controllers making sure they're connected to the headset. It's actually not a very robust way of making sure to reconnect them to the headset either. A lot of times you have to either restart SteamVR while unplugging all your dongles in your PC, which again sucks, and repairing them directly to the headset. And then one by one, plugging into a dongle into the PC and pairing the tracker to the dongle one by one. And then sometimes SteamVR will be like, oh, you already have all your devices connected, despite the fact that you have an extra dongle that has not been paired. So then you gotta restart SteamVR again. And sometimes, I kid you not, sometimes when that happens, upon restarting SteamVR, I notice one of my index controllers is again now pairing back to the dongle to begin with. It should not be that convoluted for something like this. Normal SteamVR devices that run on Valve's own tracking system. Even the dongles that Vive uses, it's all firmware provided by Valve. This should all be a software thing. You should be able to decide what radios in each device connect to what controllers. That doesn't even end the full body tracking garbage. In my hand, I'm holding the Vive Trackers 2.0 and the Vive Trackers 3.0. So I'm not sure who to blame for this next issue. I'm not sure if I need to blame Vive for not, teaming up with Valve to make this a thing, or to blame Valve for just not caring. I really don't know. But when you turn these on, you have something called an LED light that's not turning on because it's probably dead. Who knows? All of these have an LED light. And there are times where you want to know which tracker is which in the SteamVR dashboard. They all have a weird number and name that's given directly by their firmware, and there's literally no way to tell actually looking at it or anything. So Valve at some point decided, let's have something called Identify Tracker in the old managed Vive Trackers UI system. Well, there's a big problem with that. That Identify Tracker button is either grayed out or just doesn't work for these 2 devices, the newer devices. The strangest thing is, it only actually works for the 1.0 of these devices, which came out years ago, like in 2017. It works fine for that, but it doesn't work for this. And a lot of times you have to set whether a tracker is set to left foot, right foot, or waist, or many other things. And let's say one day you get into 11-point full body tracking. Well, guess what? You're freaking gonna be overwhelmed because you can't actually identify any of these trackers. It just the functionality doesn't need to be in the UI if it doesn't even exist. Not only that, another problem with freaking Vive trackers. This thing here, for literally months and months, almost like I would say a year or two, actually did not have a correct texture inside of Steam VR. So that's basically like you would see your controller floating around digitally in your headset. It would match exactly correct with real life. Well, it was just a blocky thing. It didn't have a texture or anything. And you know when they finally decided to fix that? When the new one came out. And I was actually so excited because I was like, wow, I have the 2.0s and I can actually see the actual orientation and also the battery life indicator. Yeah, the battery life indicator on the Vive 2.0, not only with just the problems with the actual texture being gone, but the battery tracker was actually under the model. So you can actually see what your battery life was with the actual SteamVR software. But guess what? The 3.0 came out and fixed all the problems of the 2.0. But I kid you not, the 3.0, even though it has a texture, you can't actually see the battery indicator in VR. And it's crazy. I feel like I'm going crazy. It's all these small things with full body tracking that already make it like. So I'm aware full body tracking is a mega enthusiast thing right now, but still, this is all using firmware and hardware that's heavily reliant on what Valve has created. If you're going to have all these features in your UI, then please make them work, God. Okay, enough about just Vive trackers. I know I went on a lot about that, but whatever. Let's go on to the next thing. Controllers! Controllers are very magical. You know why? They have something called buttons and triggers and joysticks. Oh, I don't want to press that too much. It might start drifting. Ooh. So I was also lucky enough to not only get an early prototype Vive, but I had a lot of prototype Knuckles. This is not one of them. And during the prototype times where they were kind of testing out software and building software for it, they came up with this weird convoluted binding system. And back when they were implementing it, it actually worked very well. Like it was a convoluted UI nightmare, but in terms of functionality, setting new bindings for a Knuckles controller back then was great. Fast forward to now, which is like 2.5 later since, it's a mess. This binding feature I was talking about is now referred to as the old bindings menu, which I don't really know why, because there's actually not a new bindings menu. It's the only way you can actually change bindings. Valve, what are you doing? This bindings menu now causes a ton of issues. So the one thing I've noticed about SteamVR over the years is Valve has been adding a lot of new features and things and just tacking it on over and over what came out in 2016 when SteamVR first launched officially. And while adding new features is a great thing, the way Valve has been seemingly doing it is more like just watching this weird cute animal grow a bunch of tumors that are just kind of doing their own thing and just kind of making the cute animal not very cute anymore. It looks like a freaking blob now. Poor animal. And the bindings menu is one of those things. As soon as they updated the UI a little bit when the index came out, the bindings menu started to have some serious issues. It's to the point now where if you press the bindings menu maybe too many times or do a weird combination of buttons, your bindings menu will literally screw up the rest of the systems in Steam VR. It'll screw up your video settings. It'll screw up your Supersampling settings. You won't be able to go per application settings. You won't be able to do anything. And there's another bug that sometimes happens to me where even the system buttons on the controller just stop working. And actually all the bindings, not just the system buttons, just all the bindings stop working. I think it's related to the bindings menu crashing, but I really don't know. The only way to fix this is to restart Steam VR, which, let's talk about restarting SteamVR for a second. Something that kind of makes me confused is there's an exit VR button, which is great. You press it, turns off all your headset and stuff. Awesome. Why is there not a reboot VR button, especially for a dashboard that is as buggy as it is today? Well, there is a reboot SteamVR button, except you have to use something called the desktop view to get to it because it's part of the actual UI on your desktop and not built into the NVR system, which would be a nice little thing. So if your bindings menu crashed your Steam VR or something, you gotta go to your desktop, Pray that your desktop is working because, again, even your desktop can sometimes crash and you can't do anything except take off your headset, walk to your computer, and do it that way. And you right click on your headset icon and click reboot. Good. That works. What I'm trying to say is if you don't know anything about the bindings menu, don't touch it. It is such a convoluted mess right now and will cause so many problems for you I cannot even begin to explain. Now let's talk about video settings, which is one of the most important settings when you're kind of figuring out how to make things run well on your PC, at least games. Something I learned actually recently while trying to record all the bugs as best I can, which was hard, by the way. The Supersampling setting, it's very simple, right? It renders things higher and downscales and puts it to your headset. Yeah, you can set it up to 500%. Well, I was trying to test out something and I realized there's another weird bug related to that. So there's two things. There's global supersampling settings and then per application supersampling settings. The idea behind per application tuning is, well, let's say that one game has much worse performance than another. You're going to want to either lower your actual supersampling just for that game and then, yeah, it makes sense, right? The idea is you don't have to change your global supersampling slider within every game you open. It'll just automatically do it. Well, I learned something that's pretty bizarre, and I don't really think it's intended. If you have your global supersampling setting at 500%, and then you set a per application supersampling at 500%, it's not... I still can't believe it. It's actually 500% of the global counter. So it'll be 2500% if you have both global and per application up at the same time. With SteamVR Home, which is where I was obviously doing a lot of my testing for this, it won't even open if you have it at 2500%. I think there's a limit to what your freaking GPU or computer or any software application can take in that way. And yeah, you basically have to make sure that your super sampling global is at 100%, and then it's weird. There's a lot of games too that if you change your super sampling settings, you have to restart the game. So you have to kind of exit SteamVR Home and then re-enter it, which is in itself kind of not an easy thing. You basically have to go in the settings to turn off SteamVR Home as a feature and then turn it back on to restart it. That's a very small thing, but it's just very strange that it works like that. Recently in the per application settings, they add stuff as like limiting your FOVs so you can have just weird cases where you might need to do that. Well, it seems if you are limiting your FOV and then you close your SteamVR dashboard as you're moving the slider, that whole per application panel just breaks. Gone. Nothing usable. I feel like I'm using that word a lot, right? Break. Yeah, a lot of things just break a lot. And again, if it's something that really matters to what you're trying to do or you're trying to make sure your game runs well, there's another reason why you have to go back into your desktop and right-click that SteamVR icon and click Reboot Headset. Yeah, so application settings, display settings, video settings is mostly okay, except for those weird bugs I just explained. But they are bugs. And they do possibly crash SteamVR sometimes. Now let's go down lower. There's a whole bottom bar of features. Let's start with the actual desktop view I was actually talking about. The desktop view actually... I know some people have problems with it and to where it just crashes their SteamVR, which is bizarre that happens for people. That sucks that it happens for people. If it happens for you, let me know. But for me, I actually think the desktop view works very well. That's the problem. It works well. Compared to everything else in the SteamVR UI, I literally don't even want to touch my SteamVR UI. If there's anything I need to do on my computer or settings, I will literally use my mouse cursor with my controller in the desktop view and change everything there. I shouldn't really have to do that, honestly. It's just more efficient and more likely not to crash SteamVR than the actual SteamVR itself. Recently, though, they actually added a really cool feature to it. They allow you to actually dock Windows to your controllers or even entire desktops to your controllers, similar to what an overlay has been doing for literally 5 years. So this is actually a controversial topic because Oculus in the past has been sort of stealing ideas or features from third-party developers and even blocking them from selling these features on the store because Oculus themselves had plans to actually implement them themselves. Big example is Virtual Desktop. Virtual Desktop for the longest while was literally not allowed to include the feature to stream PCVR games wirelessly to Quest standalone headsets. That rule was broken. Do you know why that rule was broken? Well, because Oculus finally had AirLink ready to launch, so they're like, Whatever, virtual desktop dev, just upload it. Kind of scummy. There's also another program on Oculus called Your Fit, which was a fitness tracking program that really no one ever really thought of that I knew of back then. It was a cool way to use your VR data and all your movements in VR to see how much calories you burned. Well, Oculus would not allow this on their store because later on, guess what? They copied the idea and put it themselves. Yeah. While Valve at the same time was on the opposite extreme, and they would not implement a feature that is so clearly good and usable for PCVR. I mean, controlling your desktop and seeing your desktop windows in VR on a PC machine seems like something that should be built in. Well, they were afraid to do it because one, they did not want to take away from the developer's features of an overlay that's been around for literally more than a few years. So they actually contacted the developer and letting them know, hey, we're going to do this. But there's also the reason that Valve, in a way, is kind of paywalling this feature if you think about it. Yes, they don't sell the feature as like something they sell themselves, but by allowing a developer to add these features on the store, Valve still gets a 30% cut of all the sales of like OVR Toolkit or any other overlay program. So it's a controversial thing, but basically, I feel features like that should just be implemented. It should not have taken 5 years to allow me to put a actual Windows desktop thing that's on my PC in VR. And it's only for my controllers. I still cannot actually put my desktop in the world constantly to view. That sucks. I don't know if Valve will ever implement that feature because they seem very tiptoeish on that fact, but I don't know what's going on. There is some bugs that have happened though, and a lot of it's weird, like all the icons start disappearing. I don't really know what creates that bug, but all the bottom icons just gone. You don't know why. It just happens. Yeah. I think the only problem with the desktop oh god, we're about to get into this. I can't believe it. The only problem with the desktop thing is when you have to type stuff. Let's get into the Steam VR keyboard. It's actually so funny to me. In my Discord, I was trying to get some feedback of what people really hate about Steam VR the most. And literally, I think every person, as soon as I brought up keyboard, every person was just ranting about it. Everyone I know hates the Steam VR keyboard. Not only is the layout just incredibly confusing, convoluted, makes no sense, and is garbage, the actual way to type on this keyboard in VR is it's just bad. It's really bad. And it's actually the worst it's ever been. It's even worse than when it first came out in 2016. The SteamVR keyboard back then actually worked really well. And I think the big thing due to it was actually because of the Vive controllers. One cool factor about the old SteamVR keyboard is you were able to use your giant touchpad on the Vive controllers with both hands to actually do this cool touch typing feature. Obviously, when the Knuckles came out, they have very tiny thumb pads, and the keyboard was around that time when the Knuckles came out, and the touchpad did work, but obviously the limited amount of space was not so good for it. So eventually, people started complaining about that. They were like, Valve, the keyboard does not work very well anymore for Knuckles. Can you please change it? And change it they did. It's so bad. Oh my god, I'm just gonna cry. First of all, the biggest downgrade I think from the old keyboard and to the new keyboard is you cannot use two hands. You cannot use two lasers to tap with one finger. You have to switch between the laser on your left controller and right controller, which is totally just jarring. You don't want to have to keep clicking a trigger just to change your laser, or only use one hand to type. It sucks. And again, the layout is really bad. For some reason, the question mark is on the left side of the keyboard. Why? And at the same time, the question mark is not in the symbol section, which is for some reason marked by a euro dollar symbol. I don't know what that's about. And the question mark is not in the symbol section. But for some reason, they decided that it's okay to have multiple versions of some of these symbols instead of putting the question mark where it should be with the rest of the symbols. It seems like they were just trying to take some things about a normal keyboard and just throw it in here, but without any real planning. It really feels like a monkey was just programming this keyboard with a good keyboard. Maybe not. Sometimes the keyboard doesn't even work. Like you'll press something on like a text bar and the keyboard won't pop up. It just won't pop up. You don't know why. You can't click it up. If the icon is gone, then you don't even know where the show hide keyboard button is. Sometimes the enter button doesn't work when you're trying to actually press enter. It's just a mess of a keyboard, and it's so rare when it actually works, and when it does work, it doesn't feel good. It's to the point where if I have to type something, I won't use that keyboard. I will literally walk to my computer, put the headset up on my head, and type that way. It's just not worth it. So yeah, keyboard sucks. It needs to be replaced. Like first thing needs to be replaced with. It needs stuff like a paste, a copy. Even if they have the control key on the new keyboard, control C, I would be fine with that. But the functionality of this keyboard is just none. All right, let's keep going. If I could literally keep ranting about the keyboard for probably an hour, but we gotta keep going. Real quick fun fact before we go to the rest of this video. I was ranting so much about the keyboard that I basically filled up my camera's SD card. Yeah, that's a rare thing. So I talked about how Steam VR is basically a bunch of tumors built on this one platform, and the tumors just keep growing and adding more tumors. Well, Steam VR itself actually, when it came out, was kind of a tumor in its own way. Steam VR was built off of something called big picture mode. Back in the early 2010s, there was something called the Steam machines, which was a kind of idea from Valve to sell PCs as sort of like these consoles, and they'd have their own OS and their own UI, and basically just to compete with Xbox and PlayStation. Well, back then it failed, but Valve was like, well, crap. We built this entire UI, spent a lot of resources on it. Let's not just put it to waste. So when they retried their hardware efforts into VR, they realized we can just port this big picture mode to VR. And actually, it kind of worked for the most part. Big picture mode itself in VR was not terrible, and it wasn't the best, and obviously wasn't really built for VR in a lot of ways, but the UI itself was not awful. That being said, these days, they hide it from the user as much as they can. Obviously, there's some points where you will have to get to the big picture mode. We'll get into some of those methods, but yeah, Valve is kind of aware that these days, big picture mode is very outdated and just isn't very good as a VR interface. One of the ways that you can actually get to it is something called Steam Chat. Oh boy, Steam Chat. Let me get into Steam Chat. So Steam Chat is another tumor. So again, when Steam VR first came out, it was kind of a tumor to big picture mode. But now they hide big picture mode behind a Steam VR now. So the tumor's hid behind a tumor, and now it's a tumor to what originally was a tumor. And now there's actually something called Steam Chat, which is a tumor to the big picture mode that is... Oh. So recently, Valve actually updated Steam's chat program, which it's great on desktop, and I like it a lot, and it works very well. But when Steam Chat was updated, the VR version of Steam Chat pretty much broke. So they basically ported the current desktop version of Steam Chat into the big picture mode. And if you ever get a message from a friend in Steam while you're in VR, it opens big picture mode and opens the chat in big picture mode. But holy crap, that can of worms is very large to open, because once you do that, you realize how convoluted the Steam Chat is for VR and how not well built it is in general. Not only do you are forced to use that garbage keyboard I was ranting about, but it's actually just weird. The whole UI for Steam Chat in big picture mode in Steam VR is just weird and not intuitive whatsoever. It's the only place where if you press down on your joystick, you actually scroll at a snail's pace. Again, the only place in Steam VR where it does that. And you have to drag chats over into the window, and it feels weird. I can't explain it. I know I'm showing video right now, but it's just really bad, and I never use it. Also, in some cases, me and a friend we actually realized that having Steam Chat open and then trying to play a game will kill the performance for a lot of our games. Both of us did it in totally different systems. So I try not to even touch Steam Chat when I'm in VR. It's a mess, and there's no real reason why I would want to do it. Another weird thing about the Steam Chat in VR is your status doesn't actually update with the desktop version. So if you set yourself as Do Not Disturb in VR, that seems to not actually do anything. It matters if you put yourself in Do Not Disturb in the desktop version, so it's actually better to go into your desktop view to message people with Steam Chat and set yourself as Do Not Disturb there than to click it in the Steam Chat and big picture mode in Steam VR, because that just doesn't work. Yeah, weird. But yeah, that's pretty much all I really want to brush up on. I think Steam VR is just a big mess right now. I imagine in like a year or so when Steam VR 2.0 comes out and fixes a lot of these problems, including the UI, because they are literally saying it's going to be a new user experience, which basically means completely rebuilt UI, which I'm making a video talking about why they might be doing this. Standalone Valve Index soon, boys. But yeah, the current iteration is a mess. I wanted to make this video so people in the future can look back and think, wow, I can't believe Steam VR was like this at one point. What a mess. Or maybe in the future, Steam VR 2.0 will start getting tumors attached to it, and then people will look back in this video and be like, look, they're doing the same thing again. Which wouldn't surprise me. That's a Valve thing to do. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of bugs that you run into every day as PCVR enthusiasts or users that I didn't even brush on. Let me know what they are in the comments. I have a friend named Bull, for example. He's been literally publishing all the issues with Steam VR on Valve's GitHub that for years, and most things haven't been fixed. It's to the point where people like him or me are like begging Valve to even let us give analytical data of when things crash and what things aren't working correctly, just so Valve can have these bug reports to fix them, because there's just too many bugs. I love using my Steam VR stuff. I love using my PC VR stuff. Please do not make me have to have a blood vessel pop every time I want to play VR. That's all I'm asking, Valve. Please. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If there's anything else that you want me to do in the near future for a video, let me know in the comments as well. I really want to cover a lot of topics. I'm trying to go back and think about things that I want to be objective about VR right now. That's it. Objectivity. I've been kind of praising Valve, but there's a lot of things that Valve has been doing wrong. And CVR is kind of one of those things. Like and subscribe. Yeah. bradsmells.com/Discord. Type that in. I bet you it's a real website. I dare you to type it in. bradsmells.com/Discord. I bet you there's even a bradsmells.com/OnlyFans. Nah, that'd be crazy.